Hello and welcome to our next week. Let me get into the content. I hope criminal investigations was good for you. I'm sure some of you are in there doing your discussions right now. I'll do some posting here in a little bit. Uh, but I am traveling tomorrow. I'm on a road trip tomorrow. So it is important that I do my video for you guys early. And that's what I'm going to do. And this week is week 14, responding to children and juveniles, our nation's future, because as we know, our future is our kids. And I wrote a paper back in 1999 predicting that Osama bin Laden would target America's youth. And I've got a terrorist attack scale that I put in the terrorism weekend. Our future, our greatest commodity is you. It's our youth. Our greatest resource in America is the youth of America, because I'll turn 60 years old this year. I'll be dead within the next 40 years. I'll be retired and not having any input or any real dialogue within 20 years. So our future is our children and our youth, and we need to make a point to prepare our youth. And in our world, the youth, sometimes they have difficulties, and we have to help try to work through them and help make our youth productive members of society, because it's important. So this week, you've got the lesson plan, the PowerPoint, what I'm about to go over, the web links. In the discussion, you have to use sources. Enre Galt is an important case. So go in here and read Enre Galt. Amber alerts, binge drinking, some of the dangers that are happening. This will give you outside sources beyond the textbook so that you can answer and address the discussion question. Okay, again, the quiz is 14 questions. And the discussion question is, would our society be better if we treated juveniles like adults in the justice system? I want you to explain your answer. Should a child's criminal record follow him or her forever? Should we know who you are, where you are? And, like for example, I've got a guy in the prison that he's one of the mentors. He's my coordinator for the faith-based value storm. So in this, I have a cell block of 84 men, and it's a faith-based program. They do faith-based programming and learning almost every day. They go through courses and classes that are Christian based and Jesus based. And this guy, I recommended him to become a peer. They're called peer educators or peer support coach, where he would teach about PREA. And if you were in my corrections class last semester, you'd remember what PREA is. But we're looking at PREA, and we were looking at his PREA, and we were looking at the things that he was doing. And we were looking at making this guy a safe coach, and his job would be to help protect the fellow inmates, and help, there's somebody that, an inmate that you could go to discuss or talk about sexual assault. But they pulled this guy's juvenile record up. And when he was 16 years old, he had a sexual relationship with a 13-year-old girl. So now he's a sex offender, and they won't let him be a peer educator because of his offense. So what we're going to discuss this week is, should juveniles be treated like adults? Should they be punished like adults? If they're sentenced to prison for X number of years, stay in the juvenile prison system until they're 18 or 21 years old, or in the state of Texas, 17 years old. And then when they hit that age, then they're transferred to the adult prison where they remain until their sentence is over and done with. Okay? So if we go back and we look at history, uh, the Romans and the Roman codes and the 12 tablets of the Romans had the age of accountability at 2 years old. So even at 2 years old, if you committed a crime, you were sentenced to prison, and you went to prison because of your failures. So that is the discussion this week, and there's a little purple dot here shows us that some people have already participated in the discussion. I'm traveling to Dallas this week, so I should have everything graded, everything from the criminal investigations graded tomorrow night after I get to the hotel, and then we'll get into some discussions. Juvenile justice is important. How do we go about dealing with juvenile justice? So let's go to the PowerPoint. Responding to our children, our nation's future, which I've already discussed. Police are some of the most important professionals who work with children, and the restrictions and the rules and the policy that police have is strict. Law enforcement is commonly the first contact with young victims and victimizers and offenders, and they're the first entry point into the juvenile justice system. Youth's perceptions about law and law enforcement will be based on the one-on-one interactions with law enforcement officers. Positive interactions are crucial to delinquency prevention. One of the biggest things, and I'm sure we're going to get into it here in a little bit, is the SROs, the school resource officers. But who is a juvenile? What is a juvenile? Each state has their different rules, so you'll need to check what Arkansas says. I do not know. All states have a specific age. And it varies from one person not yet of legal age. Youth's under 18. Definition used in 3/4 of the states. Texas, it's 17. At 17 years of age, if you commit a felony, you can be tried as an adult and sent to adult prison. The federal government, that age is 18. Okay? In 2010, juveniles made up 24% of the total population of the country. So our juvenile justice system kind of has a dual role. And the first is the parens patriae. Parens patriae is a Latin term, and technically it means that the state is the parent. Okay, so we're going to look at kids, and we're going to let you raise your kids, and as the government, as the state, we're going to let you raise your children, as long as you raise your children properly. If you're not raising your children properly, or your children are violating the law, the state is going to they're going to take custody of your children. Okay, the welfare versus the justice model. Okay, so I had this young lady, I had this woman when I was working Child Protective Services. We'll say her name was Yvonne. I think her name was Yvonne. No, it wasn't. Her name was Shirley. Okay, so her name was Shirley, and she had 7 or 8 kids. But when she was a juvenile, she had so many problems. She was taken from her parents. She was taken by her parents, and then she had other problems and other issues that the Texas Youth Department, the Texas Youth Prison, the Juvenile Probation Department actually took physical custody of this young girl until she turned 18 years of age. And she stayed locked up until she was 18 years old because we could not deal with or get her parents to cooperate. Okay. So, the one pot approach for juvenile delinquents doesn't really work because you have delinquents. You've got juveniles who are breaking crime, are committing crime and causing crime. I'm fixing to move to the DFW area where there's a lot of youth offenders. Okay. But sometimes these kids are abandoned by their parents or they're left in the streets to their own accords and they don't have a choice. Okay. They're abused. A lot of girls, a lot of youthful offenders that are girls that you find in the street have been sexually abused by a family member in the house and they run away. And then they run away and then they end up in drugs and crime and theft and prostitution and all kinds of other things. It's really sad that they run away from home to escape uh, being victims of a sexual predator just to turn around and have to rely on sex just to survive. Some are abused physically and they're running away from home because their parents are abusive. Okay. And these kids also resort to stealing. They resort to crime, to drug use, and then others are neglected. There was a time in our lives, I guess, under today's standard, you would say that most Gen X kids were neglected. We were, you know, if school wasn't going on, we were kicked out of the house by 8:30 and told not to come back until the lights came on. But I'm hungry. Well, here, here's a snack. Go away. I'm thirsty. Well, the garden hose is outside. Leave me alone. Okay, and we pretty much raised ourselves. Um, but as long as we showed up when the lights came on, everybody was happy. So, child maltreatment, abuse, and neglect are victims who need our help. They need our protection. Okay, it's intergenerational cycle of abuse. Okay, and we find that this cycle of abuse is repetitive. Okay, if uh, your grandparents abused your parents are going to abuse you. You're going to abuse your kids. It's generational. It's a curse. It's a generational curse. Um, and when I was working with CPS, we would see this. We would see the same kids that we were treating, 10 years ago as teenagers, we're now treating again, but they're the parents who are abusing and neglecting their children. Okay. And it's just a never ending cycle, a recycle of things that are going on. There are special challenges that are related to child abuse investigation. Um, the Munchausen syndrome by proxy is kind of interesting. Um, all of these osteogenesis, Munchausen, child sex abuse, child pornography on the internet, the Child Protection Act of '84. These are all different forms of investigations. I know I had a Munchausen case that I investigated, and this woman had a child that wouldn't poop every day. So, you know, she would stick things up this child's rectum to try to dig the poop out, and actually ended up hurting this child. Um, there's sex abuse cases that go on forever. Um, so children who are throwaways, they're runaways, they're otherwise missing. Again, non-family abduction is rare. Most abductions are family related, but a lot are thrown away. They're throwaways. They're runaways. Um, so NISSMART helps track these kids. So there's 5 categories of missing children. There's the throwaways. These are kids that were just left on the side of the road. Living down here in Texas, we've seen it a lot. Living down in Alpine, we saw this a lot with the illegal immigration coming over the border, especially when I was in Silver City and I was running the criminal justice program there at Silver City at Western New Mexico. What we saw and what we found was um, the administration had this policy that if you were stopped and detained with children, that they'd let you go and they'd give you a ticket and they'd let you leave because they didn't want to split up the families. So the mules and everybody would they would rent or they would buy a child. They'd kidnap a child from south of the border and they'd bring them up north until they went through the first line. And after they got their court date and after they got caught and then they were released because they had children, these kids were just left on the side of the road. But it's just the illegals coming over here that are leaving kids on the side of the road. American parents do the same thing. They get tired of the kids. They get tired of the expense, of the misbehavior, of the rebellion, of the problems that these children are causing. So they just leave them on the side of the road, hoping that somebody else will take care of them. Okay. And then you've got the runaways. Kids run away for all kinds of reasons. Um, there's the non-family abducted children, which again I said was rare. The family abducted children, which is more common of kidnapped children. They're kidnapped by the non-custodial parent. Okay, and then you've got children who are lost, they're injured, or they're otherwise missing. They're kidnapped. A lot of the non-family abducted children are kidnapped and sold into human trafficking. Okay, applying only to those who are under legal age. Status offenders only applies. Okay, and status offenses. Status offenses are those that only apply to people that are under a certain age. So the drinking age is 21. So if you're under 21, you're not allowed to drink. Okay. They've raised the smoking age to 21. So if you're smoking nicotine and tobacco and you're under 21, that's a crime. But it's only a crime because you're under 21. Loitering is more commonly enforced against teenagers. Curfew violators. A lot of towns have curfews where kids can't be out after midnight. They can't on weekends, or they can't be out past 11 o'clock during the school days. They can't be out past 1 o'clock on the weekends, and that they have to go home. These are all status offenses. Okay. Truants, not going to school is a crime. Okay. If you guys, and then we've got a few in this class that checked in at the first couple of weeks of class, and now that they got, I'm going to be a cynic, now that they got their Pell Grants, now that they got their scholarships confirmed, they've stopped coming to class. This is truancy. That's your choice. I'm going to fail you. Okay. But if you're in high school, or if you're in junior high or elementary school, being a truant, your family's going to get a fine and the cops are going to come look for you. Underage drinking, rave parties, okay? Living out here in the country, these rural high schools, they come out to these ranches and, where the dirt road ends, that's where I live. I live where the dirt road ends. And kids come out here. Kids used to come out here to this ranch all the time back in the 80s and 90s, before somebody lived out here full time, and they just party all the time. Okay, so police dispositions of status offenses has a lot. The police officers have a lot of discretion when they're dealing with this. They can just bring you home. They can do street justice. They can make you pour out and destroy all of your beer, get rid of your pot. Call your mom and dad and have them come get you. Initial contacts, it's normally a warning. They bring you to the police station. They call your parents, and your parents come get to you. And then they go to the social agency. Okay, and they try to get school involved. And then if that doesn't work, they get the juvenile courts involved. 6 to 8% of the male juveniles account for the majority of crime. The characteristic of the 8% of the problem involves the crime at an early age. There's significant family problems. There's problems in school. There's drug and alcohol use at home or with themselves. Okay. But we find that the 8% problem, we find that the 6 to 8% of the juveniles who are accountable for the vast majority of crime have got broken homes. Okay. Research shows that the nuclear family is better in producing children to become or making them into productive members of the society. Yes, are there kids of single moms who have grown up to become great people and famous and all this stuff? Yes, there has. But statistics show, okay, that here, let me put it this well, the characteristics of the 8% of those who account for the majority of the crime have been get involved in crime early in their life, uh, before they're teenagers. There are significant family problems at home, financial problems, abuse problems, sexual abuse problems. These will also turn around and reflect in school. So they're going to have problems at school with grades and truancy. Okay? And then you've also got drug and alcohol abuse, where kids will resort to drugs and alcohol to try to escape what's going on. And I saw a meme today. It said, porn is fake sex, alcohol is fake fun. Okay. And I remember growing up and going into high school and, how cool it was. We'd go to parties and we'd drink because that's what was fun. Well, it was fake fun because then you had to worry about DWI, you had to worry about sneaking in the house. There's all kinds of things that you had to do uh, to avoid getting into trouble. And then there's families, where they encouraged your drug and alcohol abuse or they helped your drug and alcohol abuse. And they worked from there. Um, Legal procedures when dealing with youths, um, custody and detention must be on reasonable grounds. This is set up by Shaw versus Martin. There is a juvenile holdover program, but you cannot hold juveniles in an adult jail. They have to be held. And if they are held in an adult jail, it is in solitary confinement and they cannot have any contact or interaction with the adults. Interviewing juveniles and custodial issues. There are problems or issues involving youths. You cannot talk to a kid without its parents' permission. So you have to have a school resource or liaison officer, the SROs. Okay. Fingerprinting and photographing children must be kept separate from adult files. Police records and files should be kept separate. Juvenile records is a civil matter, so they are not open to public inspection. Juvenile records can be sealed; they should be sealed, and juvenile rights are confidential. What's going on with kids in juvenile probation and juvenile justice is nobody's business, but that which belongs to the child or the youth and their parents. So there is a aggressive enforcement like the PET project or the police eliminating truancy. This is sending police officers out. If you're not in class, they send police to your house, talk to your parents. They send police to your parents' employers to find out where you are and why you're not in school. There's hot spots where kids will hang out instead of going to school. I remember when I was in St. Louis, when we'd skip school, we'd always go to Six Flags. Once Six Flags opened, we'd skip school and go to Six Flags up until it closed. Six Flags closed in St. Louis between October and Easter. And then the water rides didn't open until May. And then we were in school till June. So we'd skip school and we'd go to Six Flags. We'd go to the arcade. We'd go to the mall. We'd go to all kinds of places instead of school. Okay, so we have referrals and diversion programs, social services. You could get referred to CPS, Child Protective Services. to the Boys and Girls Clubs. There's community-based organizations, and they try to create programs so they can lessen the need for judicial programs. Okay, we established educational programs in school, and every one of you have dealt with the DARE program and the GREAT program, uh, about overcoming drugs, about overcoming gangs. Um, and these programs are required attendance. When I think it's fifth grade, you have to go to DARE, and then the seventh grade, you have to go to GREAT. Uh, they've got law enforcement explorer posts, uh, which gives teenagers the opportunity to explore what police work is like and what they're doing. And these are opportunities to provide ride along programs, police student internships. We do the same thing at university. We set up internship programs to where you ride with the police department to see if this is something that you're wanting to do. Okay, some police as mentors to youth, the JUMP program, or the OJJDP programs, other school resource officer programs, the McGruff program, officer friendly program. These are all to try to change the opinion or the perception of law enforcement. Okay, because especially in our inner cities, police officers are not trusted by kids. In fact, our kids are taught not to trust police. Okay. And these programs, these programs are set up as a way to try to counteract that mistrust. And we want to try to create a program or create a community where the kids think, oh, I'm in trouble, I need to go see the police, instead of, oh, I'm in trouble, I need to go find my gang. I'm in trouble, I need to go run and find my mom and dad. I'm in trouble, I need to get my buddies involved. You know, my I'm being beaten at home, where can I go? Well, we want you to be able to trust the police department and the police officers. So we have these programs put together to try to overcome the mistrust that the general public has for policing. A lot of it is community oriented policing, in an attempt to address um, the mistrust between officers and the public. Okay. So, excellence in problem oriented policing. Going back to the Sarah project, which I've discussed, and we've discussed in this class several times. So, if we've got underage drinking, it is more than a minor issue. It's more than that, the pun intended. Um, it is a major issue for minors. So, what we want to do is we want to scan to make sure that it is a problem. And we want to analyze our evidence that shows that it's a problem and find out what other communities have done to address the underage drinking. Okay. Then we want to create a response. And then we want to find out how our response is working. So we're going to create an assessment. And this one establishes, or it adds, the judge's commentary. The judge is going to make his decisions, or he's going to make his comments, his opinions known on whether or not the program is working. Here in Texas, we have a lot of sting operations where uh, into we send people into convenience stores uh, trying to purchase alcohol to determine whether or not they need or that they're old enough for the alcohol. And if they're not carded, the person gets arrested. Um, so, positive interactions between police and the youth are critical to delinquency prevention. Some youths get into trouble with the law for minor status offenses, and then they are labeled as offenders, and then that carries on. Um, all of the youth referrals to court, the great majority of them come from law enforcement. Rarely do parents go to juvenile justice to ask for help. There are two educational programs that are widely used across the country, which is DARE and GREAT. DARE is about drugs. GREAT is about gang resistance and not getting wrapped up in the gangs. Okay, so that is this week's discussion. Let me Close this, and we'll go back to this. Okay, so this week's discussion again is about should we treat juveniles like adults and how we go about doing that. So I will see you in the forums, and we will hopefully we'll have good discussion this week, and we'll talk to you later.